Hey writers, I'm really excited to bring you this interview today because this is a topic that so many of you requested. We are going to talk about novels in verse with Cordelia Jensen. Welcome, Cordelia.
Hello.
All right, before we get into it though, writers, if you've not heard of Cordelia, I do want to introduce you just a bit because she's done so many great things in the world of writing. She has graduated with an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She has four verse novels, which is also why she is here talking to us about this. And she also teaches about writing novels in verse as well. So this is going to just be a great conversation. Cordelia has also taught in places such as Bryn Mawr College, the Kelly Yang Project, the Writing Barn, and the Highlights Foundation. She is a certified book coach through Author Accelerator, and she is represented by Liza Fleissig at Liza Royce Agency. So welcome again, Cordelia. As I told you, like this was a really popular topic that people wanted to learn more about, and so I'm excited to dig in because I happen to love this format of books. I don't write in this format myself, but I love to read this format. So I don't want to leave anybody behind, and just in case people might not be aware exactly what we're talking about, can you tell the writers here what we're talking about when we're talking about novels in verse? And I noticed too that you use the phrase verse novels. So if there's, a term we prefer in all of this, that would be helpful to know too.
I don't know why I say verse novels and not novels and verse, actually. I think some people think about it like the verse is more important or the novel is more
Right.
important, but
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense to me because they're both so important
Yep.
writing verse novels. So I think it's just quicker. I've always said
No,
verse
that's
novels.
great.
Um, so like if you look up on Wikipedia or something like what's a verse novel, it will say it's it's a series of poems strung together to create a narrative. I kind of see it a little, my definition is a little different. I think that you, I think you're using poetic devices overall to create a narrative, and which ones you choose as the author really depends on the character you're writing and their voice. And so sometimes that's what I think that's part of what's really confusing and also exciting and challenging about the form is that what a verse novel is. You can open up a verse novel that's like one of Amber McBride's verse novels, for example, are extremely poetic. Every single page is truly a poem. You could pick up another verse novel where if you open any individual page, you might not even not really understand what's going on because you don't know who the characters are, you don't know what the story is, and it reads as poetic as a whole if you read the whole thing out loud or if you read the whole thing just with your with your eyes. But but it doesn't necessarily read as poem by poem. So it really there is
Yeah.
a lot of room and a lot of experiment in the form. So even defining it, I think, can be confusing sometimes. But basically,
Sure.
essentially, it's a story told through poems.
Yep. Okay. Love it. One thing that I find interesting about the format is that I notice like this disproportionate number of them in middle grade and YA as
Yeah.
compared to adult. They just seem to be um, more accepted in those markets
Hmm.
maybe than they might be in the adult market. I don't know if
Yeah.
you have any thoughts around this. Is there something about why the format is really friendly to younger readers? Is it just that they're more open to it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Um, I have a lot of different thoughts about this. One, I think, is that first of all, a lot of uh, verse novels have won awards, won big
Hmm.
Prince Newbery awards, and I think because of that, they've gotten more attention overall. And I think verse novels are a really great match for one emotional material that's hard for a kid to process, and you have all this blank space and imagery and things that will help you kind of digest uh, hard topics. I think that's one of it. Two, it's a great match for stories that are in liminal spaces, like immigrant stories or people feeling in between worlds, just like what childhood and adolescence feels like, because it is this hybrid form and it is a story, it is telling a story and it's poetry. that kind of reflects
Mhm.
it's like the form reflects the content. I think there's that. And then there's also just first person point of view. I'm not saying that there aren't third person verse novels. There are, but there are very few. There are like, I don't, it's a very small percentage compared to first person. And I think first person is also a lot more common in books for kids and
Mhm.
teens. And because kids and teens, and I don't know, I prefer also, I really like that that you feel like you're reading somebody's journal. You really feel like you're in that person's viewpoint, and you really have a strong sense of understanding that person. That being said, it makes parts of plotting harder, because you only have that first person point of view,
Yeah,
which we can get to the challenges. But um, I think those are some of the reasons why they're so popular with kids and teens. And then I guess there's this other piece, which I'm always resistant to talk about the most, but there is a reluctant reader thing, right?
sure.
So first novels are, when you open a book, just like a graphic novel has pictures, a verse novel has a lot fewer words, and it's easier for like maybe somebody to think about digesting a shorter book, if you're a kid or teen
Yeah,
struggling with
yeah.
reading. So there is that. I hesitate because I think verse novels can be just as complex and deep as a lot of regular prose novels. So even there are fewer words, it doesn't mean that the words have less meaning. In fact, sometimes each word has more meaning.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I think novels and verse have been some of the deepest reading experiences I've had, and I think on to your point about like the white space and the reluctant readers, I think that can be part of it, but I think some like the equal number of kids might be intimidated to do it because they're like, oh, it's poetry and poetry is
Yeah.
hard, and um so that's really interesting. So what do you particularly like about
Hmm.
writing novels and verse?
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I came to the form really organically and accidentally. So I was a creative writing major in college, and specifically poetry. And my first novel is called Skyscraping, and it's about it's a fictionalized version of my dad's death. He died of AIDS after I graduated high school. And this was my creative thesis at VCFA. But my first semester of grad school, I was writing just a regular middle grade camp book, and the my teacher I was paired with was not very impressed. And she was like, "What else do you have?" And I sent her these 5 poems that I'd written about my family, and she's like, "Cordelia, have you ever heard of a YA novel in verse? Like, this is what you need to be writing. Like, you should write a memoir." So it started as a memoir, and then it was really intense, and we just basically
Yeah.
I worked with somebody else who just decided who suggested I fictionalize in it, and became, it's easier to write
Yeah.
fiction in the way that like you can change things about your life.
Yeah.
So but it felt very organic to me. I think having that poetry background, and then also doing so much journaling in my life, like having that kind of snapshot feel to the story, I like really understood it very quickly, how to um kind of string these moments together. So Skyscraping was a first novel, and I think the other, what I love best about it, um, even though I kind of stumbled into it, is actually imagery. Creating an image system for a story and image construction. I really love matching metaphor and simile and a symbol to what's going on in a
Mhm.
character's world and life. And I feel like there's a real spotlight and opportunity there in verse
Yeah.
novels that there isn't always in prose. Not to say obviously prose use imagery, but it's there's a different spotlight on the form. So Skyscraping is all celestial imagery, and I had taken astronomy my senior year of high school, so I sat with an astronomy book for dummies and just like looked at terms and mapped them to what was going on
Yeah.
in the character's life. And I did, and that's YA, and then I have another YA, The Way the Light Bends, and she's a photographer, so I used all photography imagery, and then Every Shiny Thing as half prose, half verse, because I co-authored it with Lori Morrison. My character's in verse, and she uses a kaleidoscope to kind of frame her world
Mm.
and understand. And then my new book coming out in August, is called Lilac and the Switchback, and there's all kind of hiking and trail imagery in that one. So yeah, so that's what I love to do.
Yeah.
That's I like that. I like that poetry, obviously you can do that a lot in poetry, but it's not connecting to character and dynamics. So I think it's the connection that you can make between image and character dynamics that I love.
Yeah. As a reader, I love the way that the individual poems can like sort of create this wallop of a mood in a
Yeah.
way that like maybe a whole scene might be
Yes.
too long to do.
Uh-huh.
So for me that's something I love about that. But to your point about the imagery too, it's something that you can easily keep recurring
Yeah.
like an underlying thread. Yeah,
Hmm.
so much
And
good stuff.
yeah, and like it's playing with format and blank space
Hmm.
visually is also really fun. And I like to do that depending, like I like to do it more if I have a character who it makes more sense with.
Yeah,
Like I don't think it makes sense for every character. But anyway.
cool.
Um,
What have you found to be difficult about writing
um,
novels in verse?
I think by far the most difficult thing is not just for me, but like I work, I do a lot of coaching and editing
Mhm.
other people's verse novels, and I work with a lot of people who struggle with this. And by far, I think it's secondary character development because you have much less dialogue.
Oh,
If you're
yep,
writing a verse, I mean, some people write a lot of dialogue in their verse novel. I think it's pretty clunky. Um, I try to I have some dialogue. Like Skyscraping has no dialogue except for the interviews between her and her father. Um, you just have less of it. So like you have to figure out ways, like ways for your main character to describe the secondary character in ways that the reader can really visualize and hold on to. Or or you can interpolate with text messages and emails and other things that help strengthen the secondary character's voice. Because, and then dialogue just generally is really confusing because like do you make dialogue poetic like or do
right.
you make it sound like how somebody actually sounds? Sometimes that's the same thing, sometimes it's definitely not.
Yeah,
So that I think that piece is confusing, challenging, and yeah, hard.
yeah. What about genre? Because it does seem like the contemporary and historical fiction kind of lend themselves well to a verse novel, but maybe like fantasy,
Yeah,
mystery, like I'm not saying that people haven't done them, but they're far less
yeah,
accessible, maybe. I don't know if you have any thoughts on
yeah.
genre for challenging.
I think high fantasy and a very complicated mystery are both just bad matches for
Mm,
verse novels. I think magical realism and like bits like ghost stories work pretty well because they have more like of an ethereal feeling to them. Or mystery or like some emotional mysteries work fine, or like some mystery.
right.
You can use like Trouble with Heroes is a good example of Kate Messner's new book, which is primarily in verse, but there's a lot of interpolation. There's a lot of documents and other things in that. And so if I were to work with somebody who was writing a mystery in verse, I would really encourage them to use primary source material
Hmm.
to help with the plotting part of it. And yeah, high fantasy I think is really hard. Like it's also like in high fantasy, you probably aren't usually, if you want to do like whole wars between
Yeah.
different kinds of creatures, that I think that's difficult in verse. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
somebody could do it. It's not impossible. I do think that the world has, when I published my first novel, it was very like you could only do realistic
Hmm.
books in verse. You could only do like historical was definitely very popular and contemporary, but there's a lot even more experimentation now about like what plots you can or can't do
Yeah.
in verse. A lot of it comes down to character, and you can do like I right now my work in progress right now is 3 different points of view in verse, all
Mm,
with a different. They all have like are using different poetry tools. So that can also help. I think if probably in a mystery that would be helpful to have like multiple points of view.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's say you have writers, maybe like me, who are like, I love this format, but
Hmm.
this might be, I mean, it's like writing in a whole different format than anything I've ever done before.
Hmm.
Yeah, how do you like to encourage people to maybe dip their toes in the water
Yeah.
if they're interested, but maybe intimidated by the format?
I think one thing is to think about what you love about poetry and try to kind of audition. And if you have a main character in mind, try to audition different types of poetry devices for that character.
Mm,
I have a blog post on highlights, I think, about this, like auditioning voice for your main character in verse. So like try a rhyme, just try one little rhyme with that main character in mind. Try one metaphor. Try um breaking the line, try different ways to break a few lines and read it out loud. Kind of experiment with different poetry devices, and maybe then one of them will feel right,
mhm,
and then use that one to try a whole poem or whole scene. You can also, I also think it's really great, especially for people who come from a prose background, to overwrite. So write write the scene in prose
mhm.
and then try breaking the line. Then think about the words that you're repeating content. Think about the adjectives that you don't really need. Find your best one. Strengthen your verbs. Pick the line of dialogue that's most representative of this moment or this character interaction. Like keep whittling it down.
Yeah,
And you know, then do another pass and just keep going. Like keep trying to make it um, tighter and tighter.
yep, yep. So when you work with writers, because I
Yeah.
know that you coach writers as well as offer writing classes, when you're looking at the novel and verse format, are you working with writers who already have like their story structure kind of
Hmm.
figured out, or are you spending more? I guess I'm wondering the balance because just like if you were doing a prose novel, you would at some point have to work on writing the craft of prose. But writing craft of poetry is going to be like a different skill set. So how are you balancing those tasks of like needing to pay attention to things like structure and
Hmm.
character development and all that stuff, while also worrying about like line level stuff that is
Yeah.
more relevant to poetry?
So, I mean, people come to me, I feel like, from two backgrounds. They're either a poet and they want to write a story, or
Mhm.
they've written a lot of prose, or a storyteller and want to try verse. And so there's like different advice for those two groups of
Okay.
people, but I've worked with each so many times that I have a lot of advice. But generally, I would say it's really important. What I normally do is write like 50 experimental poems or free writing with with your main character, basically just like getting the voice of the character, which is a lot about getting down your poetry tools, like which kind of imagery makes sense for this character. Are they going to write what kind of Are they going to write short poems? Are they going to write long, what's the variety of length and basically style? And
Mhm.
then once you kind of have the voice down, then you're spending a fair amount of time on plot, because I do think it can be a real waste of time to really get into the persnickety line edits with, especially with verse,
Yeah.
if you don't know what you're writing about. So I do think then I spend a fair amount of time. I love story brainstorming. It's like my favorite thing to do. I do a lot of like brainstorming calls with people, and do some outlining with an openness to change it. and
Yep.
um and then and then some people come to me with a complete, like, so I do manuscript reviews a lot also, that are just really not copy edits, but line oriented,
Sure.
just thinking about where to break the line, why to break the line there, really small word oriented things. But I don't think it makes sense to you can cut whole poems. So much of revising verse novels is combining poems, taking two from here, cutting whole poems, just like, I mean, it's true in prose too. You don't
Right.
want to spend that much time in the weeds with language if you don't know what the story is about. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. All right. Well, you've mentioned your lovely books that are already out, and I do want to make sure to let the writers know that these will be in the Kidlit Summer Camp Book Fair. So absolutely check those out. Is the I Lilac's like very new, right? That one like just came out
It
or
comes
is
out in
just
August. It
coming
comes out
out?
August 19th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
you can pre-order that one, but I knew it
Yeah.
was like just around the corner here for you. So, how can people connect with you online?
We can go to my website,
Okay.
cordeliajensen.com. I'm on Instagram, Cordelia Jensen 1. I'm on Blue Sky, but I don't know the address. I still
That's all
have
good.
some X account, but I don't go to it very much. And my Facebook is a little outdated, so maybe Instagram's the best way.
Yeah, and
Um,
we'll have links to
yeah,
at least let people get to your website.
yeah,
And you're often teaching as well.
yeah,
So for writers who want to maybe have some instruction without having to have the intensity of working one-on-one, that would be a great way uh, to get
yeah.
started with a novel in verse or to work on your
Yeah,
novel.
I'm teaching in November, December. I teach a revising the verse novel class for highlights.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's a class with a workshop component,
Yep.
um, and lectures and writing exercises. And yeah,
Awesome. All right, writers. We will have links for all this stuff so that you can connect with Cordelia. And Cordelia, I just want to thank you. This was a fabulous conversation. I
thanks for
love this
having me.
format, and you're so knowledgeable about it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, writers, thanks for joining us. We will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.